On the broadcast tonight, top diplomats from Seoul and Washington see eye to eye on the need to join hands in dealing sternly with any future North Korean provocations. But on Japan's refusal to acknowledge its wartime history, the two may not be on the same page. Victims of sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II did not miss a single Wednesday for the past 22 years in holding a rally in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul. We'll show you how the cry for a sincere apology continues nearly 7 decades later. And for those of you in Seoul and the surrounding areas, brace yourselves for freezing temperatures as the first cold wave advisory of the year has been issued in Korea's central region. Early edition begins now. It is 4 a.m. in Washington, 11 Damascus, and 6 on a Wednesday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gon-young.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us. We begin with the latest from the Foreign Minister's visit to the U.S.
Where historical issues stand in the way of improved ties in Northeast Asia. That's what Foreign Minister Yun Byung-se told the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry during their meeting in Washington on Tuesday.
Yun's comments were seemingly directed toward Japan following Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent visit to a war shrine that honors several Class A war criminals. Yoo Li-an starts us off.
Korea has delivered its message to the United States that history disputes remain a stumbling block to improving relations in Northeast Asia. Following an hour-long meeting with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in Washington Tuesday, Korean Foreign Minister Yun Byung-se said the current situation in the region calls for sincere actions, adding that the two agreed on the need to alleviate tensions.
Secretary Kerry and I also recognize the growing uncertainty pervading Northeast Asia in recent times. In particular, I pointed out that historical issues stand in the way of reconciliation and cooperation in this region.
While neither Yun nor Kerry directly mentioned Japan by name, the comments are almost certainly aimed at Tokyo, as they come just weeks after Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to the Yasukuni Shrine escalated tensions with Korea and China. The shrine honors Japan's war dead, including several Class A war criminals. The two officials also agreed to urge Pyongyang to get rid of its nuclear program.
We call on North Korea to denuclearize. We will not accept North Korea as a nuclear state, nor as a nuclear-armed state, and nor will the international community abide by that.
Emphasizing the two countries stand united, Kerry added the United States is fully committed to the defense of South Korea and said it will continue to modernize its military capabilities in preparation against any threat. Yoo Li-an, Arirang News.
The United States said Tuesday that it will send 800 additional soldiers as well as tanks and other armed vehicles to Korea to rebalance its forces across the Asia-Pacific. The troops, M1A2 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles from the 1st U.S. Cavalry Division will start a 9-month deployment on February 1st, just south of the demilitarized zone separating the two Koreas. Army Colonel Steve Warren said that the troop increase has long been planned and it's part of the U.S. rebalance of its military power in the Asia-Pacific region. The U.S. already has roughly 28,000 troops stationed in Korea. And the announcement came after talks between Korean Foreign Minister Yun Byung-se and Secretary of State of Defense Chuck Hagel at the Pentagon.
In a move that is sure to further escalate tensions in Northeast Asia, Japan's ruling party has set constitutional reform and continued visit to the Yasukuni Shrine as key goals for the coming year. Our Jinju has the details.
Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party has unveiled its key goals for the coming year: reform the constitution and continue with visits to the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine. During a general meeting on Tuesday, the party decided to, quote, make practical constitutional reforms without damaging the original purpose of the country's pacifist constitution. The party also vowed not to wage war and agreed to uphold the tradition of visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, which honors 2.5 million Japanese war dead, including 14 Class A war criminals. With regard to education, the party promised to ensure that students will not be taught a pessimistic concept of history by putting in place measures for making and adopting textbooks. Those plans, however, are expected to face a strong backlash from Korea and China. The biggest concern being brought up in both countries is that Japan is trying to become a country that is allowed to engage in war by amending its pacifist constitution. The current constitution, adopted after the nation's defeat in World War II, bans the country from using military force.
Should the Japanese leader avoid facing Japan's history of militaristic invasion and not take sincere steps toward reflecting on its past wrongdoing, the country will be led down a wrongful and dangerous path.
The decision to continue visits to the war shrine is also expected to draw criticism not only from Seoul and Beijing, but many countries around the world, just as it did after Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's latest visit there. In line with its goals for the coming year, the Abe administration has also officially launched a secretariat of the National Security Council that will serve as the control tower for the government's security policies. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
22 years ago this Wednesday, the very first weekly rally organized by women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II was held. 22 years later, the rallies continue, as do the demands that Japan acknowledge its past war crimes and offer legal compensation. Our Kim Hyun-ji reports on the victims' ongoing cry for justice.
On Wednesday, 2 surviving victims of sexual enslavement by the Japanese military during World War II stood across from the Japanese embassy in Seoul, as they've done so many times in the past, along with human rights activists and civic groups. For the last 22 years, those coerced into sexual slavery for the Japanese military have held a demonstration every Wednesday, which makes it the longest rally ever in the world. The group has demanded Japan fully admit to and reveal the truth about its war crimes, offer an official apology and legal reparations, punish those responsible for the crimes, accurately report on the crimes and history textbooks, and build memorials and museums in remembrance of the victims. However, the victims, also known as former comfort women, feel Japan has not accepted any of their demands. Japanese politicians continue to make comments that defame the victims and distort history. Among the 237 Koreans recognized by the government as victims of sexual slavery under the Japanese military, only 56 of them are alive today. Meanwhile, Korea and Japan are engaged in a battle in cyberspace over a comfort women memorial that was set up in a park near the Glendale Public Library in California last July. The White House says a netizen submitted an online petition last week seeking protection for the site. This petition was filed in protest of another petition submitted last month that asked authorities to remove the Comfort Women Memorial in Glendale. About 120,000 people signed the petition demanding its removal, whereas the one seeking protection for the memorial had about 3,000 signatures as of Tuesday morning, local time. The White House's policy is to respond to a petition that has received 100,000 signatures or more within 30 days after being submitted. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
"2013 was a tumultuous year for South Korea in the region, with tensions escalating on the Korean peninsula and Japan's repeated denials of its historic wrongdoings."
For a look at South Korea's foreign relations in the new year, let's now go live to our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee at the Arirang News Center. Sung-hee, let's begin right here on the Korean peninsula. What should we expect in 2014?
Kanyang, now that's a very difficult question to answer because we really don't know what to expect from North Korea, it being, of course, one of the most unpredictable regimes in the world. However, one thing for sure is that South Korea wants to start off the new year on good terms with its northern neighbor. Now, if you have watched President Park Geun-hye's New Year's press conference earlier this week, you would have noticed that a great deal of emphasis was put on mending ties with the North, touting the benefits it would bring to both Koreas.
지금 국민들 중에는 이 통일 비용이 너무 많이 들지 않겠느냐. 그래서 굳이 통일을 할 필요가 있겠는가 하고 생각하는 그런 분들도 계시는 것으로 압니다. 그러나 저는 한마디로 통일은 대박이다. 이렇게 생각을 합니다.
So the Park administration is expected to try and mend ties with the North. Are we talking about specific steps here?
Daniel, following President Park's press conference, Seoul made a proposal to Pyongyang to hold reunions for families separated during the Korean War in the 1950s. The government suggested they take place sometime during the Lunar New Year holiday, which falls in the last week of January. The offer to hold the humanitarian event falls in line with the president's principle of starting with the lowest hanging fruit, something that is more easily achievable, and then working up to the more difficult tasks at hand. Now, in her New Year's speech, President Park said that if the North says yes to her reunion proposal, it would be an important first step in opening up a new era of inter-Korean relations. We are still waiting for an answer from Pyongyang, but most experts believe that it will be accepted, as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un had also expressed hopes for better ties between the two Koreas in his own New Year speech. Experts say North Korea's response will be an important barometer for Kim's sincerity in mending ties with the South.
But of course, Sung-hee, there are some variables that could get in the way of Seoul's efforts to improve the cross-border inter-Korean relations.
Well, experts point to possible provocations by the North stemming from instability within the regime following the execution of Kim Jong-un's uncle Jang Sung-taek late last year. Pyongyang has a history of stoking tensions on the peninsula to secure internal harmony. Officials in Seoul say Pyongyang may launch a provocation early this year, sometime between late January and early March, which is when the two Koreas usually hold military exercises. A fourth nuclear test could also be in the cards, and if that happens, that would really disrupt these efforts to mend ties. In her New Year's speech, President Park made it clear that North Korea's nuclear program is the biggest obstacle to a reunified Korea.
Well, Sung-hee, let's move from unpredictable North Korea to predictable Japan, predictable in doing everything right to infuriate its neighbors. We've seen frosty ties with Korea last year, definitely. Any hope that the two neighbors could work things out in 2014?
Well, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's controversial visit to the Yasukuni Shrine late last year enraged Seoul and has further frayed ties between the two countries. And Daniel, unfortunately, the prospects for better relations don't look all that good, at least for the first half of this year, as there are a number of events in Japan that have raised diplomatic tensions with Korea in the past. Japan will mark its annual Takeshima Day on February 22nd, which calls on Seoul to return Korea's easternmost islets of Dokdo to Japan. In March, Japan will announce the screening results of its history textbooks and unveil its diplomatic blue paper in April. Now, these events are likely to further sour relations between Seoul and Tokyo, which means it will take some time before we see the leaders of the two countries hold their first bilateral summit since they took office.
Well, the Park administration clearly has its hands full in the new year on the diplomatic front, among others.
Well, thank you for that report, Sung-hee. That was our Hwang Sung-hee reporting live from the Arirang News Center.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with heroes and experts to help you understand the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gun-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now, shifting gears to the economy, Korean import prices rose by 2. President Park Geun-hye has called for an educational revolution to foster creativity in the nation's young people. Now, speaking at a New Year's ceremony with members of the education sector, the president said that classrooms should be a place where students develop their dreams and talents, not one in which a premium is placed in competition and college admission. President Park vowed to change the nation's education paradigm one step at a time so that students are free to be creative and develop both their intellect and personalities. Korea saw a boom in the medical tourism industry last year, with the country's health tourism surplus topping $100 million for the first time ever. Well, the Bank of Korea said Wednesday that the country's income from medical tourism was $187 million in the first 11 months of last year, growing more than 35% from the same period in 2012. Now, during the same period, however, local residents' overseas spending on medical tourism decreased by more than 11%. Korea saw its first surplus in the medical tourism industry in 2011.
Moving on to other stories, Korean tech giants Samsung and LG are facing competition from Japanese and Chinese companies in an increasingly heated battle for the ultra-high-definition TV market. At the Consumer Electronics Show, now running in Las Vegas, Samsung and LG both rolled out their lineups of curved UHD TVs, as Sony and other Japanese companies showcase UHD TV lines of their own. Chinese budget TV maker TCL unveiled a line of UHD TVs that are less than half the price of Samsung and LG's models, which are priced between $30,000 and $70,000. Market analysts expect UHD TV sales of around 12 million units this year. Staying in the tech realm, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas has been the place for global electronics companies to showcase their latest and greatest products. And automakers are also getting in on the action. This year, they're showing off their new ways to incorporate the gadgets we use each day into our driving experience. Our Ji Myung-gil has more.
By embracing smartphone and mobile computing technologies, automakers are beginning to blur the line between our digital and driving lives. BMW made a splash at the opening day of this year's Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas by demonstrating a way to control its new i3 electric car using Samsung's Galaxy Gear smartwatch and Bluetooth wireless technology.
Using Samsung's Galaxy Gear, you can remotely control the car's temperature, recharge the car battery, and operate the door locks.
Mercedes-Benz, not to be outdone, is using the Pebble smartwatch to show off a new way to check up on vehicle conditions.
We see the total mileage, we see the tire pressure, so you have full information of your vehicle on your watch.
Audi teamed up with Google to bring Android to cars. An Android tablet was designed to provide in-car entertainment such as music and streaming videos. The owner can also search for apps in the Google Play Store. This year's CES is proving that more and more automakers are rushing to make sure there is no disconnect between the gadgets we use each and every day and the vehicles that get us where we're going. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
A grand return, if you will. A rare 18th century Buddhist tapestry has returned to Korea decades after it was stolen during Japan's colonial rule of Korea. Our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won tells us more.
This grand Buddhist tapestry, which is more than 3 square meters, is believed to have been made in early 18th century Korea. It shows Buddha giving a sermon to his followers. Experts believe the textile's artistic value lies in the way it depicts Buddha and his followers. Most paintings show Buddha's disciples sitting behind him, but in the tapestry, 2 disciples sit in front of Buddha, listening attentively as he speaks.
Numerous artists have drawn Buddha's disciples, but this tapestry depicts them in a deeply moving way that touches the hearts of viewers. I personally believe that proves that the tapestry has artistic value and should be designated a national treasure.
The tapestry was stolen from a Buddhist temple in Korea during Japan's colonial rule in the early 20th century. It was then sold to a famous Japanese art dealer. Later, it was auctioned in New York in 1944 and sold for $450 to a museum in Virginia. The tapestry had been rolled up in a storeroom for some 40 years until the museum turned it over to the Overseas Korean Cultural Heritage Foundation last month. It is currently housed at the National Museum of Korea. The tapestry is one of the many artworks that were taken or stolen during Japan's 35-year colonial rule over the peninsula in the early 20th century. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
In a move seen as an important step toward dismantling Syria's chemical weapons stockpile, the first batch of chemical weapons materials was loaded onto a ship and taken out of the country on Tuesday. The operation is the first step in a UN-led deal to rid the country of its deadly chemical arsenal. Our Son Jung-in has the details.
Raw materials for poison gas were loaded Tuesday onto a Danish cargo ship at Syria's port of Latakia in what is being seen as a major milestone in a plan to rid the country of its chemical arms by the middle of this year. The UN and the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog responsible for ensuring the weapons destruction said the Danish ship is on course for a meeting with a U.S. Navy vessel that will then take the cargo out to international waters where it will be destroyed. The chemicals were scheduled to be removed from Syria by December 31st, but a worsening domestic conflict, bad weather, and other factors delayed the operation by a week. Syria agreed to abandon its chemical weapons by June of this year under a deal brokered by the U.S. and Russia. The deal came about in response to a chemical weapons attack on a Damascus suburb last August that left at least 1,400 civilians dead. Since then, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's forces have been under international pressure over allegations that he used sarin nerve gas in the attack. The weapons removal operation is taking place against the backdrop of a widening civil war and escalating infight between rebel factions. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the war, now in its third year, has killed more than 130,000 people. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, over in the U.S., the worst cold spell in about 2 decades is gripping much of the nation. Record-shattering low temperatures have grounded flights and halted trains, and at least 20 deaths have been blamed on the weather since last week. Our Connie Lee reports.
A blast of Arctic air has settled over much of the eastern United States. In upstate New York, the cold is visible in the frozen roads and buildings covered in snow. Washington, D.C. is also suffering from the abnormally low temperatures.
It's not good. This is like the coldest we've had it in years, and it's sad.
On Tuesday, the National Weather Service said that temperatures from the Midwest to the Southeast were expected to be 14 to 19 degrees lower than average for this time of year. Central Park in New York hit a record low of minus 16 degrees Celsius, and usually mild Atlanta, Georgia in the south reported its coldest temperature in 44 years at minus 14 degrees Celsius.
We're not used to it at all, so we're not prepared.
The deep freeze grounded nearly 2,000 U.S. flights on Tuesday and delayed more than 1,000 others, according to one airline activity website. And 3 Amtrak trains that were heading into Chicago came to a halt, leaving more than 500 passengers stranded overnight.
When we passed Princeton, he said we coming to a little delay. That delay lasted 12 and a half hours. There wasn't no delay.
Since last week, at least 20 weather-related deaths have been attributed to the cold. And outside of the U.S., Western Europe has also been battling some of its worst storms in 2 decades. Torrential rains and high winds have caused massive flooding and power outages this week. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Now, as our Connie Lee just reported, while the U.S. is struggling with extreme weather conditions, we here in Korea have been more or less lucky enough to enjoy mild winter weather recently. But my understanding is that that's about to change. For details, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung.
Good evening, Ka-young and Daniel. Well, a strong wind watch has been issued in the West Coast regions and a cold wave watch in the central regions.
And Bo-kyung, when are we expecting temperatures to take a dive?
Well, Daniel, the short answer to that question is later tonight. Currently, it's 2 degrees here in Seoul, but numbers are forecast to dip to -3 by 9 p.m. and to -9 degrees by tomorrow morning. So make sure to dress warmly when heading out tomorrow morning. Other than that, the mountains in Jeju, which are under a heavy snowfall watch, are currently seeing some snow, and up to 40 centimeters are forecast to fall. Looking ahead at tomorrow's readings, Seoul reaches -3 degrees. Meanwhile, Gwangju and Busan peak at -1 and 4 degrees respectively. Moving on to other regions, snow showers are forecast in Jeju with a high of 3. Meanwhile, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out at -1 and -7 degrees respectively. Well, that's all I have for you this hour, and back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Bo-kyung. And that wraps up the news for this hour. Thank you for watching. This is Daniel Chen.
And I'm Moon Ga-young. Thank you as always for being here with us. Have a wonderful rest of the evening. Stay warm, and we'll see you right back here same time tomorrow. Good night.